In this week's episode of Non-Native Creative, I am very happy to welcome my friend Luuvu Hoang. Luuvu has been a creative director in Tokyo for many years, and he's worked a lot with food-related projects. From time to time, he also does food photography for international publications as well. In this discussion, we talked about the kinds of things that got him interested in food in the first place, the experience of opening and running a food truck in Tokyo, and also the experience of opening a restaurant in Tokyo. His Basque restaurant, Tiki Plaka, has been listed in the Michelin Guide for Tokyo for the last 2 years, so you'll get some interesting background on that experience. He also shared some good travel stories and some good advice for people who are thinking of working internationally. Check him out on social media and on his website after you listen. Enjoy! On this episode of Non-Native Creative, I'm here talking with Luuvu. So Luuvu has done a lot of internationally minded creative projects here in Tokyo, and he's got a lot of travel experience. He's got a lot of, I think, stories to share about where he's been, the things that he has done in terms of food and photography, and even in terms of fashion, well, we'll talk more about that later, I guess, a little bit. But I'm here to talk to him today about his experiences working internationally, his thoughts about what has gone well for him and what he hopes to do more of in the future, and also just kind of to share some personal experiences. So thanks very much for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. But I was hoping that we could start off today just kind of with a bit of self-introduction. Like, how would you, when you introduce yourself to somebody for the first time, what do you usually tell them you do?
Yeah, I always have this long pause and I'm like, because it's actually really difficult to explain what I do because I do so many different things at once. But pretty much it all comes down to I just play the role of a creative director most of the time. First and foremost, I do food photography, mainly in Tokyo for magazines around the world that want to feature, certain restaurants here in the city, and the rest is food consulting. So, like helping people with their menu, or restaurants, and even launched 2 food trucks of my own in recent years, and a lot of traveling and eating.
So what would you say kind of sparked your interest in doing these sort of food-related creative works?
Well, I've always been interested in this genre. Before I moved to Tokyo, I was in Seattle, and I was doing photography there. And before that was banking, and that's a whole nother story. But in Seattle, I started photography, and then with my love of food, I met a lot of people in the food industry, and suddenly that photography transitioned into food photography, and then my network grew in that department, and I moved here, and then it expanded to Tokyo, and here I am,
Cool. Okay, so it was sort of from, like you mentioned briefly, I won't go into that, like banking was a whole different story, and then there was this kind of radical change through following this kind of just interest or maybe passion for food and meeting people and connecting then.
Yeah, pretty much. It was mostly just like connecting with people and just going with the flow of life. I felt ever since college, I actually really wanted to get into photography. Just couldn't afford it, because camera gear is so expensive. It's a lot more affordable now, but back then it was actually really expensive. You really have to have like some real money to get into it. So, I mean, being in the banking world, I made money, and that helped me follow certain hobbies and passions that I have. And then so I picked it up and started shooting, and it turned out, I take good photos, I guess.
Just magically?
Yeah, magically.
Wait, in your case, though, how long did it take you before you thought, okay, I'm getting pretty good at this?
No. Well, the thing is, you feel that you are good at that moment. It's like this self-illusion.
That's a very harsh word. I was going to say self-evaluation.
No, self-illusion is the right word, because as I grow each year, I look back at my photos, and then as years pass, I look at like towards more and more towards the beginning. I'm like, really, I like this photo. I was like, so I mean, obviously we evolve and change, and our styles change, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of self-illusion towards the beginning, but it gave me confidence, even though it's not real or not. But now I'm happy where I am, but there's always room to grow.
Right. So as you were kind of doing that, as you were sort of building those photography skills and building those networks and things, how did you do that really? Or were there things that just really struck you as you were making progress and trying to do more of the photography and more of the food stuff?
Photography wise, it was the travel. The traveling really helped with like inspiration and with motivation, because through travel you see and discover new things, and because of that you are evolving and your taste is evolving, and I think travel was the biggest thing, my biggest impact in my life.
I know that like your most recent project, for example, this the restaurant that you've opened in Tokyo is Basque themed foods, and that's sort of something that's been emerging
in Tokyo
fairly recently.
I
can only think of one other restaurant has quite a lot of visibility at this point in time. But my understanding is that that's kind of a point of interest worldwide for food at this point.
So before San Sebastian Basque, specifically San Sebastian, the city in the Basque country, is very, very well known for food. Whether it's high-end food, creative food, modern food, or you get into, like the street food for common people and for just basic classical food. It's amazing from top to bottom, and I discovered that cuisine for the first time while I was living in Seattle. There was this cute tiny little restaurant called Chori, in downtown Seattle, and I went there at least once a week. Loved it. Small bites, amazing flavors, so when I got married, I was like, hey, let's have the honeymoon there, right? Instead of Hawaii or whatever, I wanted to go eat. So we did. So we spent a honeymoon there, and I just fell in love with the city and in love with the food even more. And this recent project in Tokyo, I had never thought I was going to do something like this in Tokyo, because I mean, I love the food, I can cook it, I can, talk about it, but I didn't connect it with Tokyo at all. So it just kind of happenstance. A lot of different circumstances that led me to that cuisine.
Okay, and then in the process, so there was a point before you opened the restaurant that you're operating now, where you were doing food trucks that were centered around introducing Vietnamese food to Tokyo.
Yeah.
Was that kind of a segue into doing a restaurant, or maybe you didn't imagine it as that point at that time?
That was a segue from the restaurant, actually, because I initially wanted to open a space, but I looked at the costs and all that stuff. It was really high, and after being in Tokyo for a while, I realized, there's a lot of food trucks here, and there is a culture here for food trucks. So I decided, I don't need that much funding to do an actual, food truck. So I decided to go that route away from the restaurant, and then did the banh mi and the coffee for a while, and then realized that really the restaurant is the way to go.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the complications of operating a food truck is actually quite a big hassle, right? And the cost of rent and all that stuff is basically the same as having a restaurant space. So, yeah.
I see. So it sounds like there were, of course, financial considerations, and then there were also maybe like logistic challenges.
Yes.
Was that, do you think, are those kind of general for anybody looking to open a restaurant or a food truck, or was it maybe further enhanced by perhaps rules in Tokyo, or enhanced by the challenges of being a non-native person here?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely enhanced being in Tokyo and the rules that they have here. Having the self-illusion again that I'm just gonna fight the system. That's how I went into it. It's like, all right, I'm gonna do this. People have this way of doing things, and I'm gonna go in and figure out my own way. And both have its ups and downs, pros and cons. But at the end, the rules in Tokyo pretty much controls all. One of the biggest hurdles for a food truck operator here is parking space, right? You need a space to park and sell food, and you're not legally allowed to do that on the street anywhere. Unlike the U.S., you can just find somewhere and park it and sell food until people kick you out. So here in Tokyo, you have to have permission from the landowner or whatever, and there's a company that offer that service to food truck owners, to rent out spaces that they have talked with the landowners and stuff, right? But then they take a 15% cut, which is pretty big for a food industry, because you only come out with, if you're lucky, 30%, right, of profit, and they take 15% of the sales, which is even higher than the profit. It could end up being the whole profit.
Did you notice that there were any barriers or any particular obstacles you encountered because you were maybe not a native person trying to set up a business here?
Well, I mean, the language barrier is huge. That alone, would complicate a lot of issues. Especially once the business is open, right? And you have all these things that you want to do to market and expand the business and grow it. The language barrier is huge. Luckily, I had staff to help me with that stuff. Opening the business was not a problem, right? Is the operation once it's open. That was the biggest. That's when the problem starts coming. Like for me, finding an interested party to do a certain project with me, it wasn't easy, but it was pretty easy, and they're pretty excited with the ideas and stuff like that. And then it came down to expectations, and we spent a lot of time assessing revenue before we even opened, right? So there was a lot of talk about numbers, and a lot of talk about like what to do, how to do it, blah blah blah, and even before we started, right? And then once we did start, if those numbers didn't meet expectations, it was actually really difficult to handle it, and that's where I learned, and that's where I learned that to set your expectations for long-term goals if you want to start something, and make sure that the parties that you work with, they understand that as well, right? Because if they don't, it's like after a month they're like, hey, we're not making any money. I'm like, hey, it's only been a month.
I see. So was that like particularly enhanced being here, or do you think that's applicable anywhere really?
I'm not sure. It might be. I feel like it might have been more enhanced here, or maybe just the people that I dealt with, they're not experienced. To me, I felt that they are very experienced in running a business. But yeah, I mean, in other countries, like I talk to potential investors in Hong Kong and stuff, and people who do business out there, they do expect not to make money at first, right? They do plan out for the year. Like my current project, and with the investor, he's like, yeah, I'm at least 1 year we're not gonna make any money. I'm like, okay, that's a little too conservative. But I think that's what you should approach. That's how you should approach it. Expect that, so that way you can prepare yourself mentally for anything that comes up.
I see. So taking what you learned, I suppose, then from the food truck experience, you were able to apply that to the actual restaurant experience.
Yeah. That and a lot of different things, like there's still things I'm learning now, but there's like, it's the people you work with, the ideas, the execution, the way that people work and think here. It's also very different too, from a Western mindset.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think so. Because they have a process, right, where I'm like, I'm just gonna go with the flow.
Okay, so a little more spontaneous, perhaps.
Yeah. Especially in the food truck, you kind of have, you're mobile. It's a mobile business, so you kind of have to roll with it, right? And my staff is like, you need to have a plan. I'm like, yeah, I did have a plan, but something made it change, so I'm changing with it. If I stick with the plan, we're gonna be stuck here with nothing, with no customers, right? So
you found that when something would pop up, an unexpected thing would pop up, you'd kind of roll with that punch.
Yeah. You kind of have to, with anything, just even with life, But even in my personal life and in my professional life, I feel like there's a lot of pushback for the unexpected.
Here specifically?
So like if something comes up and we had to change plans like right away, they're like, why? What were we doing? I'm like, we just got to do it. We just got to change right now, figure it out, and move on.
How did you convince people of that, or were you able to?
Well, they got used to it after time.
Okay.
Because again, it's a startup business and it's a mobile food business. So they started to adapt to that style, and then they started to come to me with ideas, and stuff after time. So I thought that was great growth on their part. But towards the beginning, man, it was really tough. They're like, it's just really hard to get through, to get them to think outside the box.
I see. So there was, like you said earlier, there was a language barrier factor, but then there was also just kind of an approach, a way of thinking.
Yeah. The way of thinking, the way of doing things, and they want to do it the Japanese way, and I'm fine with that. But at the same time, I'm thinking, well, we want to be different, right? We want to bring something special. So we got to think differently, right? Or else we just become a part of the noise.
I see. Right? So do you think that in the end, like the solutions that you arrived at, were they kind of a compromise, or did you tend to kind of push really hard for the thing that you wanted to do in that case, or did you find a middle ground at all?
In the beginning, I pushed hard for what I wanted, and then I pushed less, maybe because they adapted, right? But now I'm actually pushing even less, because I've adapted to the Japanese culture here, right? And I've learned their style, I learned the way they think and how they do business, and it's really hard to change the people. So I approach it in two different ways, where I either express myself and show that this is what I really want to do and make myself more unique in a way, or for people who, and I do some consulting for people who want to do business here or would partner up with people here, and I had to explain to them like, hey, this is what you have to do when you want to do business here. These are the barriers that I couldn't even get over even now. So you have to just use these barriers and grow with it, right? Basically, if you want to work with Japanese partners, especially for a large company, you really have to learn their way, right?
Obviously, you coming from a non-Japanese background and then working with obviously Japanese people in Tokyo, then do you find yourself ever kind of in this weird, I shouldn't say weird, but do you find yourself ever in this sort of in-between position where you're not quite, your original background, but you're not quite this other thing either?
Yeah. Well, basically, that's how I feel wherever I live, because I'm an immigrant. So even in America, it's even more so, I feel.
Okay.
Because, you're not white, even though certain areas of the country is very accepting, very open. But there's still, a barrier there, maybe not for the people that you're friends with, they don't feel that way, but it's more like an internal struggle of identifying who you are as a person and your heritage, right? And for the longest time when I was growing up in America, I always had this feeling like, I wonder what it's like to go to school and hang out with my own people in Vietnam, and experience all that, right? Even in Japan, it's like, oh, what if I was Japanese and went to school here? That, just experience that. And so to me, I couldn't identify who I am here, there, everywhere. Even when I go back to Vietnam, they speak Japanese to me.
Really?
Yeah.
When you say they, do you mean
like
Vietnamese
the Vietnamese people
speak Japanese to you?
Yeah, they speak Japanese to me.
You mean like your family and your friends there?
No, like the vendors and restaurants and everywhere.
Really?
Yeah, I walk down the street and they're like, "Konnichiwa." I'm like,
because
I'm
they
one
know
of you.
Because they know that you live and work here.
No, I don't look Vietnamese, I guess, in a way.
They think you look Japanese.
Yeah,
Oh,
they think I look Japanese.
Wow.
And, maybe it's the way I dress or whatever, but yeah, so, I mean, even in the U.S., people couldn't figure out what Asian country I'm from.
I see.
Right?
I see.
Even my own people. I go into a Vietnamese restaurant and they're like speaking Vietnamese in an ill manner about something, and they look around and behind me and they're like, oh, he's not Vietnamese, and I just start laughing.
Really? Really?
So, I'm used to that, and maybe that's another reason why I feel this way about myself, this lost identity. But I don't think that's the case. I think that's a lot of Asian Americans that's been, that left their home country and they come here, especially you come here and you see like, everyone getting along and having their own little thing. Of course you feel disconnected,
I see.
Yeah.
So has that sort of course, in the food truck that you did, it was, as you said, it was presenting Vietnamese coffee. It was presenting banh mi, like these very
Vietnamese things.
Right. Was that sort of out of an interest to introduce something that you felt a strong connection to?
Yeah. So, I mean, that was a struggle for me because one, I eat the Vietnamese food here and it's gross. It's gross.
Wait,
And
hang on. When you say gross, can you be more specific?
like it doesn't taste good.
like the flavors are bad, or
The
it's
flavors are
improperly
way
prepared?
off.
Okay.
Like, I mean, if you're gonna rank it from 1 through 10, right? I'd be like 3, 4.
Whoa.
Right.
Okay.
The best I've had is maybe a 5, and that's to me that's just passable. Right. And I just had a talk with a food writer recently about the history behind that and how I came to that conclusion. Yeah, that's another thing.
Okay.
Anyways, so I wanted to either advance Vietnamese food and introduce like real flavors to Japanese people here. So that's one of the reasons why I did the banh mi. And at the same time, that's not really my strength. My strength is the current restaurant, right? Western food. That's where I spent most of my time in my spare time, like studying, practicing, eating, and all that stuff. That's my expertise. So to me, opening the banh mi food truck was like, oh, which way do I go?
What was the response to that from of course you had a variety of different customers, Japanese customers and non-Japanese customers, but did you get a general response?
Yeah, for the most part, people liked it, people loved it, and it wasn't what they expected for banh mi, I guess. I use really expensive ingredients, especially the bread. I have this like belief that for a sandwich you have to really go all out on the bread, because that's half the sandwich. Right? If the bread sucks, right, the sandwich sucks.
That's true. That is true.
Right. That's my belief.
Well, I feel like we could have a whole discussion about the state of bread in Japan as well.
Oh no, I love the bread here. So
different discussion.
There you go, different discussion.
Okay.
But so to me, I search everywhere for the right baguette, and I know that, and using my travels in Vietnam to pick out certain things that I really loved about each banh mi shop that I ate at, and put it all together to make mine. So my sandwich was actually a mix of everything that I had in Vietnam, and I was pretty proud of it. People liked it. But keeping the cost down was really hard. Really, really hard.
And did you find that people were willing to pay for those ingredients?
Yeah. They did.
They paid. Yeah,
they did. So,
that's good, because I've heard one of the I shouldn't say criticisms, but one of perhaps the things that I've heard, particularly about food from other countries in the U.S., especially Mexican food, for example, is that people are unwilling to pay more than a few dollars for like a burrito or a taco, because they associate it as being this kind of street food.
There's a whole history behind that too. But because those vendors are making food, like Mexicans, Chinese, Vietnamese, Americans, they were making that food to feed themselves, to feed their people, because when they immigrated over, they missed their homeland's food, right, and they can't get anywhere else. So some people decided to open restaurants for their people. So, and being that it's feeding your own people, and they don't make that much money, you can't charge a premium, right, because they don't make enough to go out and eat all the time. So you have to make it affordable. So that's why the food there is so cheap, especially the Mexican food trucks and stuff. So, but over here, on the other hand, I find it a little expensive. And after opening my own, I was like, all right, it's really hard to keep the cost down here, because the ingredients here are so expensive. Yeah. Another
thing I guess I've heard too, especially specifically with regard to food in Japan, and perhaps in contrast to a more Western approach to eating and dining, is that perhaps in the West, where people are willing to drop a lot of money on, the kind of latest tastes, trends, or the big trendy chef, or the newest in what's the word, the special word that they have for like sciencey foods, like macro,
molecular
gastronomy. Yeah, so people are willing to go and spend their money on like these molecular gastronomy-centric meals where you get, I don't know, smoky things. Whatever the latest thing is, people will drop their money there.
Oh, I think people drop their money here too.
Well, I've heard that while I'm sure, I've heard it's considered in some cases more valuable to do a traditional thing well here.
Yes.
That perhaps that is more highly valued, I should say. While the trends do exist, that perhaps people are more, because they're familiar with a tradition and they can identify perhaps with that tradition, they're more inclined to spend money on the known thing.
Yeah. Well, true. I mean that's from a Western standpoint, right? Because to us, they're like doing traditional stuff, but to them, for Japanese, even Vietnamese, Chinese, they're just doing what they know, right? And what they trained for all their life to do. So the modern stuff in the U.S., we have all that because we have, it's a melting pot, the country. So we have influences from all around the world, and chefs there actually travel. They travel to discover new flavors, new anything, ideas, inspiration, meet other chefs, right? I noticed that in Japan, a lot of the chefs, I'm not talking about the high-end chefs, I'm talking about like the middle ground chefs, a lot of them don't travel. Even the young chefs haven't traveled much. So to me, they can't bring in new ideas if they haven't experienced it, right? And seeing it online is one thing, but being there and eating it and experience it, it's a whole nother game.
So is that something that you still try to do whenever possible? Is continuing to travel and try to eat and experience new places?
Yeah, definitely. Like I feel in a slump when after a certain amount of time when I haven't left the city or the country. So I need to travel, and it really revitalizes me spiritually. Overall, it's, even if I had bad food, it's just being out there and seeing stuff. It helps a lot. It helps cleanse your mind.
I see.
Of all this crazy noise in Tokyo.
Right.
Yeah.
When you do travel, then do you ever have moments or experiences where you just go, oh my gosh, this is a thing I absolutely need to implement in what I'm doing, or this just taught me something so amazing?
All the time, and I mean everywhere I go, I always like keep a note of what I eat. Like my wife always says, like, you don't remember a lot of stuff, but you remember exactly where and when you ate a certain dish. Right?
Priorities.
Yeah, priorities. Right. So for me, I don't know, for some reason, food memory is very strong. So I remember a lot of stuff, and 2 years later I would be like, oh, I remember I ate this at this place and they did it this way. I'm gonna use that in this new dish that I'm trying to make, right? So like these, and I feel like that's how a lot of chefs work when they travel, and that's why it's very important to travel. I think.
So it's that sort of like do your thing, like practice, put it into practice, do that thing for a while, then get out and sort of absorb and then review. Just the constant process of doing that is sort of what produces that evolution.
Yeah. And some of the best restaurants in Tokyo are, highly rated and highly acclaimed restaurants in Tokyo are the chefs who are doing these fusion. I wouldn't say fusion, but in their own way. Taking new experiences and making it their own, and and grow. Right. And then
we spoke a little bit earlier about this too. Maybe, perhaps, I suppose, another maybe reconnection is maybe a good word. So it sounds like you've been focusing a lot of your time on food-centric projects, but you initially talked about getting into food and photography.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're kind of coming back around to pairing that. Or maybe not pairing them together again, but maybe photography is sort of re-entering the picture. Forgive the pun. Photography is kind of coming back into the frame. Sorry.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh God, photography. I'm going to stop there. But it sounds like photography is kind of coming back around, and you're now implementing that. Given that you're kind of seeing a new, perhaps, need in the market for it.
Yeah. So with all the food stuff I'm doing, people in Tokyo know me as Luuvu, the food guy, right? So, but I'm like, well, my real core is photography. Right, that's where I feel most comfortable. That's another reason why I love to travel, is just to snap, street photos of just people living, and that to me is very inspirational. But yeah, so lately I've been getting back into photography, and that has to do with a lot of with the new camera I just bought. So it kind of revitalizes this energy that I have and this love for photos. So so it gave me a few ideas. Like one of the reasons why I stopped doing photography is when I started moving here. I was doing a lot, but transitioning to the food truck is, because I'm doing food truck and the photography business, is hard for me to get, because one, I don't speak the language and I don't really know how to get clients. And I realized, I did work with a studio and I had to really rely on them to get me clients. And I feel like that's how a lot of photographers work. They work through a studio and you're reliant on that studio to find you work, and they take a cut, right? So it took me 3-4 years to make this connection, but I was like, hey, what if I create something to connect the customers and the photographers, right? A platform. So I'm working on something like that right now. Yeah.
It's because that's something that's sort of, at least in Japan, services that have been existing like Airbnb in the US and in other countries are still fairly new at this point in time.
Yeah. Airbnb is what, 2-3 years old here? It's super new and it's taking off like crazy. And yeah, my idea is kind of loosely based on that, but for services instead of apartments and homes, it's photography services.
Right.
So we'll see how that goes. We're working on it. And there's people coming in all the time too. Like I remember maybe 7-8 years ago, I thought, hey, what if I became a photographer for visitors who wants nice photos, who come to Seattle, because we get tons of tourism there, especially Japanese at the time. And whenever I travel, I give people the camera and they would like chop off my head.
Oh.
In the photo, I'm like, I don't want a photo of me. I want a photo of me and the background.
Yeah. Right.
So I thought, hey, there might be a need there. But then that was a long time ago. So now it's coming back, I guess. Yeah.
I see. So in aiming to sort of connect people to the things that they need, especially here in Tokyo, this is a service in general, kind of an idea in general that is still emerging, of connecting people via an application or via the internet, right? And it also, which is sort of interesting to me, it removes the human contact. It removes the maybe the awkward conversation from, and by that I mean like if I'm a customer searching for someone, if I'm searching for a service. I don't have to go from website to website, or don't have to go physically door to door to meet with people. I just like look at an app and say, oh, this seems to be exactly what I'm looking for, and I can contact that person directly, and it's quick and fast, and it's like all in my phone. Exactly. But this is still a fairly new idea.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't say a totally new idea, but in comparison to, in comparison to other countries, it is emerging.
Yeah. I think the IT world is emerging in Tokyo in the past, 2 years? It's really behind. Investors, venture capitalists see that as a big problem. They're like, I've read countless articles about Tokyo. It's one of the financial capital, markets, of the world, and innovation here is barely, in existence. So there's a lot of money here, and there's not a lot of creation, right? But in the past several years, there's been people who've been stepping up. There's like startup, conventions and tech conventions and all that stuff. It's being pushed in a really big way, especially by SoftBank.
I see.
Right.
So you kind of have the sense that if you're interested in Asia, if you're interested in like especially Japan or Tokyo in specific, that now would be a good time to start
definitely.
really seriously exploring.
Really think so. Yeah.
I see. So is that kind of what you're aiming to do now? You're seeing this point in time?
Yeah. For me, yeah, definitely. You know, I love the food industry. I love food, but it's a slow business, right? If you want to make money, tech is a good way to go. I'm just gonna test it out and see how it goes, but I can do both.
I see. So like in a perfect world, then what would be like your perfect scenario? If you could, well, I mean, I know that's a big question.
Yeah.
But in terms of maybe one of the themes of what you've discussed today is how necessary it is to think long term. Like in terms of like a long-term maybe vision you have for what you'd like to do, is there something you have in mind?
Oh yeah, I mean that's why I moved out here. Actually, and without a long-term goal, I think everyone should have one. If without it, you will lose direction along the way, and you won't have anything to strive towards, and you won't have anything to be like, hey, what I'm doing now gonna take me there, right? So you need that end goal to direct yourself and help you make decisions towards that. So I've been talking a lot about that a lot lately, because people are coming to ask me, you know. But for me, yeah, I do have an end game, and my end game is actually very vague and very big. Is that I want to have enough money or enough partners with money to help me go into Vietnam and help me change the way people consume there. Consume food, drinks, alcohol, wine, all that stuff.
Is there like a specific way you hope to change it?
Not yet. You know, I mean, and in the beginning, the very, very beginning, I thought, I'll go in, I'll partner up and open up a bar, you know, show people how to drink alcohol, because they're just treating it like Vegas. You just get bottle service and getting drunk off of like a bottle of vodka or whiskey or whatever, right? And for me, being I guess, you know, a lover of cocktails also, it's like there's a craft side of that, you know, it's like every ingredient and all that stuff. So I want people to understand why this alcohol they're tasting and drinking and buying is so expensive and so good. Right, and how it can be used in other ways versus just mixing it with orange juice and cranberry juice and getting drunk.
So maybe acknowledging like, okay, yes, maybe drinking is fun. There's the fun aspect, but here's how you can improve your enjoyment even more.
The experience, right? To me, everything is an experience, you know, and when people have a good experience, they learn, they grow from that.
Is there any experience that you've had in your time that kind of just really stands out to you as this taught me so much? Like, is there any experience? I'm sure there's many, but in terms of something that did that for you?
Man, that's a loaded question.
Well, I can think of conversations with people that I've had that have just stuck with me forever, and that have really deeply inspired me.
Yeah, I mean. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is my the food truck operation. That experience taught me a lot about everything. You know, there's business, dealing with people, managing, and learning the Japanese way of doing business and maturing as a businessman, I guess. You know, like recently there's been several people who's been coming to me and asking me, hey, you want to help me with this project and that project, right? And then I started going off. I was like, all right, who is this person? Giving them, like, asking all these questions and then telling them, like, all right, before we get started with this, we need to do this, we need to do that. And then I look back and then I'm like, I've grown. You know, it's like, because before, if you asked me that same question 4 years ago, I'd be like, yeah, let's do it, without even thinking about all these things, right? So now, like when an opportunity comes up, I'm like, all right, I had to go through the motions and think about it, you know, and making sure that this is a good project, and even if it's the right fit for me and that person to work together, because just because an opportunity comes up doesn't mean you should take it. You need to assess the opportunity and the person you're working with, because even if it's a good opportunity, you start it but you don't match, right? A month in, 6 months in, the project falls apart, right? So there's a lot of consideration.
Right. So would you say that much in the way that you described about how when you look over pictures that you took in the past and you thought to yourself,
oh yeah, that was the same moment.
I liked that at some point in time.
Yeah,
do you find yourself doing that with opportunities that come to you now?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like most definitely, you know. And a lot of times I need to take a step back and be like, I'm just gonna let that one go, you know, because there's too many things I want to do. You know, it's like there's way too many things I want to do.
Right.
So
but overall, it's taking each of those opportunities on a case-by-case basis.
Yes.
And thinking about
Yes.
that.
Yes. And again, you know, you need back to the point where you have to have the end goal, right? And how is this going to lead you towards that, right? So if what you're doing now doesn't help you in that way, why are you wasting your time? Why are you wasting the other person's time? Why are you wasting the investor's money? You know, so you need to make sure everything fits into your, not fit, but more like align with what you're doing. How is it going to help you move on to the next step towards your goal? Right.
Excellent. Thank you so much for today's discussion. I really appreciate you coming out.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for watching this episode of Non-Native Creative. If you liked this episode, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Feel free to leave comments about this episode in the comments section too. Please make sure to stop by the project Patreon at patreon.com/nonnativeCreative. Patrons can get access to Patreon-only discussions, bonus behind-the-scenes media, interview transcripts, and access to patron-only live streams. Your support will help make sure the series can continue to share exciting, interesting stories from creative people working across borders. Thanks again for watching. See you next week.